They ruined my wife's bike, Jack said quietly. That's the part they were going to regret. Nobody in Red Valley had ever heard Jack Whitmore raise his voice. Nobody had ever seen him flinch. But when those boys laughed while they tore apart the Harley, his dead wife helped him build something. Behind his eyes went very, very still. The kind of still that isn't peace. The kind that comes right before everything changes. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Jack Whitmore opened his shop at 6 every morning. Not because the customers came that early. Most of them didn't roll in until 9, sometimes 10, whenever the coffee kicked in and the day stopped feeling like something to survive. Jack opened at 6 because the quiet was different at that hour. The street was empty. The light came in sideways through the grime on the windows. The smell of motor oil and old steel was the only thing in the air, and for a man who had learned to love silence the hard way, those first few hours were the closest thing he had to prayer. He'd moved to Red Valley, Colorado 14 years ago, with nothing but a truck, a toolbox, and a Harley Davidson he couldn't bring himself to sell. The town had looked at him the way small towns always looked at strangers, with cautious eyes and measured welcome. But Jack wasn't the kind of man who needed people to like him fast. He was patient. He showed up. He fixed what needed fixing. He charged fair prices, and sometimes he didn't charge at all. And after a year or two, Red Valley had stopped looking at him like a stranger and started looking at him like a fixture, like the water tower or the grain elevator or the old diner on Fifth that served eggs all day. Something that was just there, something you stopped noticing until it was gone. His shop sat at the end of Clement Street, wedged between an empty lot that used to be a hardware store and a dry cleaner run by a woman named Carol, who brought him sandwiches on Thursdays. Whitmore Motorworks. The sign was hand-painted and the letters had started to fade, but Jack had never gotten around to replacing it. There was always something more important to fix. I was 58 years old. His hair had been dark once, back when he was someone different in a life that felt like it belonged to another man entirely. Now it was blonde going silver at the temples, and he wore it short because he didn't think about it anymore. He wore the same thing most days, a denim shirt, work-worn and soft from years of washing jeans that had been blue once, and a pair of Chippewa boots so broken in they were basically part of his feet. His hands were the hands of a man who had worked with them his whole life, scarred across the knuckles, permanently stained at the cuticles with grease that no amount of soap could fully reach. People in Red Valley liked Jack the way you like a good tool. They trusted him. They brought him their machines and their problems, and sometimes when the shop was slow and the afternoon got long, they brought him their stories. He listened. He fixed. He didn't offer advice unless someone asked for it directly, and even then he kept it short. He was not a man who used many words, but the words he did use, he meant. His name, the one he had now, was the only name most people in town had ever known him by: Jack Whitmore, the mechanic, the quiet one, the guy who'd once rebuilt a Korean War vet's old knucklehead for free over the course of 3 months, just because the man came in every day and talked about his dead wife. And Jack figured the work was the least he could do for someone carrying that kind of weight. Nobody in Red Valley knew what his name had meant once. Nobody knew about the years before Colorado, the roads, the clubs, the kind of reputation that gets built one decision at a time and one stand at a time, until your name carries weight that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the kind of man you are when nobody's watching and everything's on the line. Jack had walked away from all of it 25 years ago. Not because he was afraid, not because he lost, because he made a choice the way men sometimes do, to trade the life they're known for in exchange for the life they actually want to live. He'd watched too many men die holding on to their legends. He'd watched their legends die with them. He had decided he didn't want that. He wanted to build things. He wanted to fix things. He wanted to come home to Sarah at the end of the day and eat dinner at a table that wasn't surrounded by noise. Sarah had been gone for 6 years now. The cancer had taken her in the spring fast and mean the way cancer sometimes is, and Jack had spent the first year after feeling like a man operating on autopilot. He went through the motions. He opened the shop. He fixed the bikes. He ate the sandwiches Carol brought on Thursdays. He did not fall apart because falling apart was not something Jack Whitmore did. But something inside him had gone quiet in a way that was different from the quiet he'd always carried. Heavier, more permanent. The one thing that still made him feel something, truly feel something, not just go through the motions of feeling, was the Harley. A 1970 Harley-Davidson FLH Electra Glide, panhead engine, original frame, a bike that had no business still running in the condition it had been in when he first bought it back in the 90s, a rust-eaten wreck and with a cracked tank and a seized motor. Sarah had spent 3 weekends helping him pull it apart on the garage floor. She had handed him tools she didn't know the names of and asked questions about every part he touched, and she had listened to every answer with the focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand. She had painted the tank herself, burgundy with a small white pinstripe along the lower edge, freehand with a brush she'd bought at an art store in Denver. It wasn't perfect. The line wobbled slightly near the petcock. Jack loved that wobble more than anything else on the bike. It was hers. It was the proof that her hands had touched it. He kept the Harley in the back corner of the shop away from the work bays on a rubber mat he'd cut to fit. He didn't ride it often. When he did, he went alone, usually early in the morning before the town woke up, down the county road that ran east toward the foothills. He never stayed out long. He just needed to feel it sometimes. The engine under him, the road moving, the sense of something continuing. I was in the middle of replacing a clutch cable on a customer's Sportster when the first conversation happened. Ma'am. He heard the truck before he saw it. A black Escalade, clean and expensive, the kind of vehicle that stuck out in Red Valley the way a tuxedo sticks out at a county fair. It parked across the street and 2 men got out, a driver who looked like he'd been hired specifically to stand next to things and look large, and a man in a sport coat who moved the way men move when they've spent their whole lives believing rooms were arranged for their benefit. Victor Hayes. Jack had heard the name. Red Valley was a small town. News traveled. In the past month, Hayes had bought the old cannery property, the vacant building that used to be the sporting goods store, and the lot behind the diner. I was putting together some kind of commercial development, mixed use according to the paper. High-end retail, the rumor went, something that would bring outside money in, which was either the salvation or the destruction of a place like Red Valley, depending on who you asked. Hayes crossed the street without hurrying. He came through the open bay door and stood just inside it, hands in his jacket pockets. Looking around the shop, the way buyers look at things, they're already pricing. Jack put down his pliers and straightened up. Whitmore, Hayes said. He said it like a formality, already past it. That's me. Victor Hayes. He didn't offer his hand. I own HV Development. You might have seen my signs around town. I've seen them. Hayes looked at the shop again. The tool chests, the parts bins, the bike on the lift. Good space, he said. Good bones. It's a shame it's being underutilized. Jack waited. I want to buy this property, Mr. Whitmore. The parcel goes well with the adjacent lots I've already acquired. I'm prepared to offer you significantly above market value. You'd walk away comfortable. Honestly, more than comfortable. I'm not selling. Hayes smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd heard that sentence before and had never found it to be true. You haven't heard the number. Doesn't matter. Everything's got a number. This doesn't. Jack picked up his pliers again. I appreciate you coming in, but I'm going to have to get back to work. Hayes stood there for a moment. The smile stayed, but something changed behind it. A small recalibration, the kind that happens when a man realizes the conversation isn't going the way conversations are supposed to go for him. I'd encourage you to think about it, he said. The development is going to happen. These blocks are going to change. It would be better for you to be part of that process voluntarily. I'll manage, Jack said. Hayes left. The Escalade pulled away from the curb, smooth and quiet. Carol poked her head in from the side door 10 minutes later. She'd seen the whole thing through her window. Was that the developer? She said. Yeah. What did he want? To buy me out? What did you say? No. Carol was quiet for a second. Jack, she said, the way people say a name when they're worried. You know what he's been doing to the others, right? The way he... I know. He's not just making offers. He's making things difficult for people who don't... Carol, Jack looked at her. I'm not leaving. She looked at him for a long moment, trying to read something in his face. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. She nodded once and went back to her side of the building. The inspection started the following week. A city code inspector arrived on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard and an apologetic expression that didn't quite cover the fact that he was clearly not there by his own initiative. He spent 2 hours going through the shop, checking the electrical panel, the floor drains, the ventilation, the fire suppression system. He cited Jack for three things: a missing cover plate on an outlet box, a drain that wasn't properly sloped, and a ventilation gap that didn't quite meet the most recent code update. None of it was serious. Any competent inspector knew it was the normal wear of an older commercial building, not a safety hazard. The citations carry 30-day cure periods in modest fines. Jack fixed all three issues by the following weekend and filed the paperwork. The week after that, a different inspector came. Environmental. He was looking for hazardous waste storage violations. He found nothing because Jack had run a clean operation for 14 years, but the visit itself cost Jack most of a Tuesday. 3 customers canceled their appointments because they'd heard from where he couldn't say, but small towns have ways that the shop was under investigation. The week after that, someone left a note on one of his customers' windshields in the parking lot. A suggestion phrased politely that patronizing certain businesses during an ongoing regulatory review might not be the wisest choice. Jack found out about the note from the customer himself, an ex-Marine named Del Prescott, who drove in from 20 miles out to have his electric glide serviced, and who told Jack about the note with his jaw set and his eyes hard. "I want you to know," Del said, "I threw it in the trash and I've got my next 4 visits already scheduled." "You didn't have to tell me," Jack said. "Yeah, I did," Del said. "You'd want to know." Jack nodded. He would. "I didn't call a lawyer. He didn't go to the paper. He didn't do anything that would make noise. He just kept opening at 6, kept fixing what needed fixing, kept being exactly what he'd always been. But he watched, and he thought, and somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he hadn't visited in 25 years, something was beginning to stir. Her name was Emily Castillo. She was 34 years old, and she ran the small accounting firm 2 blocks over, sandwiched between a tax prep office and a barbershop. She had a neat, precise quality to her, the kind of person who color-coded her folders and remembered the due dates of things other people forgot. She'd grown up in Red Valley, gone to school in Denver, and come back because her mother needed her, and then her mother got better, and Emily realized she didn't want to leave. She had been Jack's accountant for 6 years. They had what he would have called a professional friendship, warm, but bounded, the kind that stays on the right side of the line because both people are sensible enough to know where the line is. She came in on a Thursday afternoon, not with a sandwich, the way Carol did, but with his quarterly tax file and a look on her face that told him the file wasn't the whole reason for the visit. "The inspections," she said, setting the folder on his workbench. "I've been asking around. You don't need to do that." "Jack," she gave him the look, the one that meant she was going to say what she had to say regardless. "The code inspector who came last week, he cited 3 other businesses on this block in the past month. Businesses that rejected Hayes's offers. The environmental inspector, same thing. I checked the public records." "That's not nothing." "No," she agreed, "it's not nothing. He's building a file, trying to make you look like you're a problem operator so he can go to the city with regulatory grounds for some kind of action. Or just make you so miserable you give in." Jack was quiet for a moment. "What do you think I should do?" She looked at him like the question surprised her. Jack Whitmore didn't usually ask what people thought he should do. "I think you should talk to an attorney," she said. "Someone who knows regulatory harassment law." "That's probably right. But I also think," she stopped, seemed to reconsider something. "You're not going to do that, are you?" It wasn't quite a question. "I might," he said. She shook her head slowly, and something shifted in her expression, past worry, past frustration, into a place that was closer to curiosity. "You're the most unreadable person I've ever met," she said, "and I do taxes for a living." He almost smiled. Almost. It was a Friday night late when it happened. Jack had stayed after closing to finish a carburetor rebuild on a '78 shovelhead that the owner needed back by Saturday morning. He'd been at it for 3 hours, and he was close, and the shop was quiet the way it only got after 8 o'clock when the street outside went mostly dark. He heard the voices before he heard anything else. 4 of them, young. The kind of young that still thinks consequences are something that happened to other people. I didn't move right away. He stayed at the workbench and listened. They came in through the open bay door, the way people come into places they don't think belong to anyone casually, like guests who haven't been invited and don't think it matters. "Look at this place," one of them said. Jack heard them moving through the front of the shop, running hands along the tool chest, tapping on things. Old Harleys, another one said. Man, these things are dinosaurs. This the one, a third voice, younger probably. The old one in the corner. Jack turned around. Three of them were standing around the Harley. The fourth was near the door, hands in his pockets, watching the designated witness for whatever came next. They were young men, early 20s. The kind of clothes that cost money but worn to look like they didn't. Jack had seen their type before, men employed by people who wanted something done but didn't want to be seen wanting it. Is that your bike, old man? The first one said. Jack looked at them, not at any one of them in particular, at all of them the way you look at a situation rather than its components. Step away from the bike, he said. His voice was level, completely level. The one who'd asked laughed. Or what? Step away from the bike, Jack said again. Exactly the same way, same tone, same volume. One of them put a hand on the handlebars, not to touch them really, to demonstrate that he could. Relax, the first one said. We're just looking. Nice paint job. Your wife do this? He said it the way people say things they've been told to say, with the specific cruelty of knowing exactly which wound to push on. Jack went very still. Yeah, the first one continued, picking up confidence from the stillness. We heard about the sob story, the dead wife and the old bike. Very touching. He reached out and pressed his thumb against the tank, leaving a print in the middle of Sarah's burgundy paint. You really think some rusty antique is worth more than the kind of money Hayes is offering? The second one had produced something. A key or a screwdriver tip. Jack couldn't see it clearly from where he stood. The sound it made when it dragged across the fender was a sound that Jack would remember for a long time. Metal on metal, deliberate and slow, the kind of sound designed to be heard. Stop, Jack said. Not a plea, not a shout, just a word placed in the air between them with complete precision. They didn't stop. The first one laughed again. The one with the key or the tool kept going and working his way up from the fender toward the tank. The third one leaned forward and put his palm flat on the headlight housing and pressed until something inside it cracked. The fourth one, the one near the door, had stopped, looking casual. He was watching Jack now with the specific attention of someone who has just noticed that something about this situation might not be what they expected. Jack didn't move. He stood there with his hands at his sides, and he watched them do it. He watched them scratch the tank. He watched them crack the headlight. He watched one of them slash the seat leather with a blade that appeared and disappeared quickly. He watched all of it, and his face did not change, and his hands did not come up. And the silence that came off him was the kind of silence that the fourth one, the watcher by the door, had clearly never encountered before. You're not going to do anything, the first one said, half laughing, half something else. Seriously, Jack looked at him. I'm doing something, he said. What's staring at us? Remembering, Jack said. Something about that word, the way he said it. The first one laughed again, but it was a shorter laugh this time, and the fourth one by the door took a small step back without seeming to realize he'd done it. They left shortly after, rough and loud, on the way out the door. Their bravado intact in the way it always is when you've done the thing and nothing stopped you, and you still don't fully understand what you just walked into. Jack stood alone in the shop. He looked at the Harley, the scratches in Sarah's paint, the cracked headlight, the slashed seat. He reached down and picked up something off the floor. Something that had fallen probably from one of their pockets, probably without them noticing, in the way things fall without being noticed. A lighter, brushed steel, old enough to have somewhere, and on the side pressed into the metal a symbol, small, simple. The kind of thing most people who saw it wouldn't recognize at all. Jack held it for a moment, turned it over in his fingers, looked at it. Across the street, the light was still on in the diner. And a man sitting by the window, Jack had registered him peripherally when he looked up, older. Heavy-set, with the particular posture of someone who has spent a lot of years on a bike, was standing up from his table. Jack could see him through the window. The man's face had gone the color of old paper. He was staring across the street, staring at Jack, at the lighter in Jack's hand. The man reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, put it to his ear. His mouth moved. Jack couldn't hear him through the glass in the distance, but he could read it. 2 decades of learning to read situations, to read rooms, to read faces had given him that. The man said, "It's him." Then Jack Whitmore. Then we found him. Jack closed his fingers around the lighter. He set it down on the workbench next to the carburetor he still hadn't finished. He looked at the Harley again, at Sarah's paint scratched and marked and diminished by people who didn't know what they were touching, who had no idea at all what they'd just put their hands on. He picked up his wrench and he went back to work because there was still a carburetor to finish, and the man needed his bike by morning. And Jack Whitmore, whatever else he was or had been or was about to become again, was a man who finished what he started. The shovelhead fired up clean on the first kick at 11:47 p.m. Jack listened to it run for a moment, standing there in the quiet shop with the smell of oil and the sound of an engine that had been given back its heartbeat. Then he shut off the lights. He locked the front door. He drove home. I didn't sleep much, but that wasn't new. Sleep had never come easy to a man who spent his nights replaying the things he should have done and the things he chose not to do, and trying to figure out, still after all these years, where exactly the line between those two categories ran. By the time the sun came up over the foothills east of Red Valley, his mind was very clear. Not angry, not afraid, just clear. The way it used to get back when clarity was the thing that kept people alive. The way it hadn't been in 25 years. The customer came for his shovel head at 8:15 Saturday morning. His name was Roy Cutter, and he was 61 years old, and he had owned that bike since 1987, which meant he and that machine had been through 3 decades of bad roads and good ones together. He walked into the shop, heard it tick over on the first kick, and his face did something that faces don't usually do in front of other people. He stood there for a second with his hand on the throttle and his eyes wet, and then he cleared his throat and pulled out his wallet. "What do I owe you?" he said. "Same as we talked about." Roy counted out the bills. Then he counted out 2 more. "For the late night," he said, setting them on the workbench without looking at Jack. Jack set them back on the edge of Roy's helmet. "That's not necessary." "Maybe not." Roy pocketed his wallet. "But I'm leaving them there." He looked around the shop then, and his eyes found the Harley in the corner. The scratched tank, the cracked headlight, the seat with the cut running diagonally across the leather. Roy had lived long enough to know damage when he saw it, and he'd lived long enough to know the particular kind of damage that gets done on purpose. "What happened to your bike?" "Kids," Jack said. "Simple. Flat." Roy looked at him a long moment. "Anything I can do?" "No, Roy nodded, the nod of a man who believes the answer but doesn't fully accept it. He put his helmet on, walked the shovelhead out to the street, fired it up, and the sound of it going down. Clement rolled back through the open bay door and settled into the shop like something returning to where it belonged. Jack turned back to the Harley. He'd covered it with a canvas tarp the night before, not to hide the damage, just because he couldn't look at it all night, and he knew that about himself. Now he pulled the tarp back and stood in front of it and let himself look. The scratch on the tank started near the petcock and ran down at a diagonal cutting through the white pinstripe and into the burgundy underneath all the way to the bare primer. The headlight housing had a crack running from the mounting bolt across the face of the glass, not broken but weakened, the kind of thing that would go the rest of the way the first time it hit a bump. The seat leather was split cleanly. Someone had used a sharp blade, not a key. Deliberate. That was the word that kept coming back to him. Deliberate. He ran one finger along the edge of the scratch. Slowly, the way you touch something that's been hurt. Then he picked up his phone and called Emily. She answered on the second ring. It was 7 minutes past 8. She was probably already at her desk. "I need the name of that attorney you mentioned," he said, a pause. "Really, you were right," he said. "It needs to be on the record." Another pause, longer this time, the kind that means someone is recalibrating what they thought they knew. "I'll text it to you in 5 minutes, she said. "Jack, are you okay?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." He looked at the scratch in Sarah's paint. "I'm fine," he said again, and this time he almost believed it. He hung up. The text came in 4 minutes later. He stared at the attorney's name and number for a moment, then set the phone face down on the workbench and went to make coffee. The man from the diner came at 9:30. Jack heard the Harley before he saw the man, a Road King early 2000s, well-maintained, the kind of bike ridden by someone who knows what they're doing and takes the time to prove it by how clean the machine runs. It pulled up in front of the shop and idled for a moment before going quiet. The man who came through the bay door was maybe 65, built like someone who had been large once and had settled into a more durable version of it. His hair was gray and cut short. He wore a plain black jacket, no patches, which was its own kind of statement to anyone who knew how to read it. He stood inside the door and looked at Jack, and Jack looked back, and something passed between them that didn't require words. The recognition of two men who came from the same world and knew what that meant. "You saw me last night," the man said, not a question. "I saw you," Jack said. "I wasn't sure you'd remember my face. It's been a long time." "You're hard to forget, Hector." Hector Diaz. That was the name attached to the face. Jack had placed it during the night, pulled it out of the part of his memory where he kept the things he didn't look at often, but never let himself lose. Hector Diaz, Albuquerque chapter, 28, maybe 29 years ago. A bar in Flagstaff, a situation that had gone sideways fast, and Jack standing in between two groups of men who had every reason to put each other in the ground and talking them back from the edge of it, one sentence at a time. Hector had been on one side of that room. He'd driven 4 hours to be in Flagstaff that night. Later, he'd said Jack's words were the only reason he hadn't done something that would have destroyed his life. He'd said it once quietly and never brought it up again because men like Hector didn't make a habit of saying things like that twice. "What are you doing in Red Valley?" Jack said. "Visiting my sister." Hector crossed the floor and stopped in front of the Harley. He looked at the damage for a long time without saying anything. "When did this happen?" "Last night, after closing." "Hayes's people." Jack looked at him. "You know about Hayes?" "My sister owns the pottery shop on 3rd. He's been working his way through this street for 2 months." Hector's jaw was set. "She took his offer last week. She didn't have a choice, the inspections, the customers being scared off, the whole routine. She cried when she signed the papers." He paused. "She'd had that shop for 16 years. Jack didn't say anything. "I was in that diner because I was taking her to dinner, trying to cheer her up." Hector looked at Jack's hands, then back up at his face. "And then I looked out the window and saw you standing there with your shop behind you, and I thought I was losing my mind." "How long have you been in town?" 3 days. I was going to leave tomorrow." He paused. "I'm not leaving tomorrow." "Hector, don't." The word landed with quiet force. "Don't tell me it's not my business. Don't tell me you have it handled. I sat in that diner and I watched them go into your shop, and I didn't know it was your shop, and I didn't go across the street because I didn't know. And now I know." He looked at the Harley again. "And I'm not leaving." Jack studied him for a moment. The years had done what years do, deepened the lines, thickened the gray, but Hector Diaz's eyes were exactly the same. The kind of eyes that decided things and then stayed decided. "You're still the same," Jack said. "So are you." Hector nodded at the scratched tank. "What do you need?" Jack was quiet for a moment. The question pulled at something in him, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. The particular feeling of being asked that question by someone who meant it without condition. "What do you need?" Not "what can I do," which comes with limits built in. "What do you need?" "Nothing right now," Jack said. "I'm going to talk to an attorney Monday. I'm going to put it on the record. Handle it the right way. And if the right way doesn't work," Jack looked at him. "Let's try the right way first." Hector nodded slowly. "All right." He reached into his jacket pocket and put a card on the workbench. Old school paper, slightly bent at one corner. A name and a number. "That's my phone. You call me, day or night, for anything. You hear me?" "I hear you." Hector turned to go, then he stopped. "That lighter," he said without turning around. "The one they dropped. You still have it." Jack reached into his shirt pocket and held it up. Hector turned around and looked at it from across the shop. He went very still. "Where did they get that?" he said, and his voice had changed. Quieter, more careful. "I don't know." Hector crossed the floor in 6 steps and took the lighter from Jack's hand. Turned it over, looked at the symbol, looked up. "Jack, do you know what chapter this is from?" "I know what the symbol is." "Do you know what it means that those kids had it?" Jack met his eyes. "Tell me." Hector set the lighter down on the workbench between them. "That's not a chapter that hands those out casually. Someone gave that to one of those kids, specifically, as a message." "A message to who?" Hector looked at him steadily. "To whoever found it," he said. "To whoever would know what it meant." He paused. "Victor Hayes didn't just hire those kids to scare an old mechanic. Someone told him you were worth scaring that way. Someone who knows who you used to be." The shop was very quiet. Jack looked at the lighter. "Someone knows I'm here," he said. Someone's known for a while, Hector said. Question is what they want. By Sunday afternoon, Jack had visitors he wasn't expecting. The first was Del Prescott, the Marine who pulled up on his Electroglide and came in carrying a six-pack and the expression of a man who has decided to be useful, regardless of whether he's been invited to. I heard about your bike, Del said, setting the beer on the workbench and looking at the Harley. He didn't ask how he heard. In a town this size, things move through the air. I'm not much for standing around, he said. Give me something to do. Jack looked at him. Del was 63, Vietnam era, the kind of man who'd seen things that had permanently reorganized his understanding of what actually mattered. He had a steadiness about him that Jack respected. I'm not starting anything, Jack said. I want you to understand that. I understand it. Del pulled a stool over to the workbench and sat down. I'm not here to start anything either. I'm here to sit in your shop on a Sunday afternoon. That's it. Jack almost told him to go home. He didn't. The second visitor came an hour later. A woman named Gloria Park, who ran the laundromat at the far end of Clement Street. The one business on the block that Hayes hadn't approached yet, probably because it sat on a corner lot with a complicated easement situation that made it less valuable to his plans. Gloria was 67, and she'd been born in Seoul, and she'd lived in Red Valley for 32 years, and she had the manner of someone who has outlasted more difficult things than this and knows it. She brought food, a container of something that smelled like garlic and ginger, and she set it on the workbench next to Del's six-pack, and she said, I'm not leaving until I know you've eaten something today. I ate, Jack said, when he thought about it. This morning. That's not today, that's this morning. She pulled up a second stool. Sit down, both of you. They sat. And something happened in that shop on that Sunday afternoon that Jack hadn't planned and didn't know how to account for three people who'd been living their separate lives on the same street, eating food out of a container and saying the kind of things people say when they're worried about something real. And they've decided they're not going to pretend they're not. Del talked about his neighborhood in '76 when they were trying to shut down the VFW hall and what it took to keep it open. Gloria talked about her lease renewal 2 years ago and the pressure that had come from a property management company that had wanted her out. Jack mostly listened. That was what he did best. But once, just once, he said something that stopped both of them. I've spent 25 years trying not to be something, he said, and I'm starting to think you can't outrun what you actually are. You just postpone it. Del looked at him across the workbench. What were you, he said, not challenging, genuinely asking. Jack looked at him for a moment. Someone who didn't walk away from things, he said. Del nodded once. Doesn't sound like something you should be trying to stop being. So, Monday came down hard. Jack was at the attorney's office by 9. Her name was Patricia Leong, and she was 45 and sharp, the way people get sharp when they've spent years working cases where the money on one side was much larger than the money on the other. She went through everything. Jack had the inspection records, the timeline, the note on Del's windshield, the customer cancellations he documented. She listened without interrupting. She made notes on a legal pad. When he was done, she set down her pen and looked at him. This is textbook regulatory harassment, she said. It's well documented enough that we could make a strong case for tortious interference with business operations. Possibly more. What's more, Jack said, if we can establish that Hayes directed the vandalism of your property, the damage to your motorcycle, that's a different category of case entirely. She paused. Can you prove those kids were hired by him? Not yet. Do you have any idea who they were? Jack had spent Sunday going over it. The four of them. Their clothes, the way they moved, the way the one near the door had watched rather than participated. He'd filed the lighter and what Hector had told him about it in the back of his mind separately because that thread was one he wasn't ready to pull in front of an attorney yet. I have a description, he said. I could probably identify them. Leong nodded. All right, here's what I want to do. I want to file a formal complaint with the city regarding the inspector visits and document the pattern. That creates a public record. Then I want a letter sent to HV Development, not accusatory, just informational, letting them know we're aware of the pattern and we're watching. Will that stop it? She looked at him levelly. It will make it more expensive to continue, she said. Whether that's enough to stop it depends on how much Hayes wants this property and how comfortable he is with scrutiny. Jack thanked her and paid the retainer and left. He was walking back to his truck when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. Colorado area code, but not Red Valley, he answered. Jack Whitmore. The voice on the other end was older, male, a little rough at the edges like someone who'd spent a lot of years outdoors. I don't think you know me. My name is Cal Briggs. I run the Iron Valley chapter out of Pueblo. Jack stopped walking. How did you get this number? Hector Diaz, Cal said. He called me last night. I'm sorry to come at you out of nowhere. I know you've been living quiet. I know you didn't ask for this. But Hector said there was something you needed to know. Jack waited. The lighter those kids had, Cal said. Hector told me about the symbol. I made some calls. That lighter came from a man named Dennis Pruitt. You know that name? Jack thought, reached back. Pruitt, he said. West Texas, late 90s. He was running some things he shouldn't have been running. That's the one. He's been in and out since then. Right now he's in Colorado Springs, and he's got a connection to HV development, a financial connection. Cal paused. Victor Hayes doesn't just want your property, Jack. Pruitt has been pointing him at it, specifically at you. Why? That, Cal said, is the question. And I'm working on it, but I wanted you to know that it's not random. It was never random. After Cal hung up, Jack stood on the sidewalk outside the attorney's building for a long time. The morning traffic moved past him. People went in and out of the coffee shop across the street. The town moved the way towns move, indifferent to the specific weight of what one man was carrying. I thought about Pruitt. He went back through the catalog of that era, the West Texas situation, the way it had resolved what he had done and what he had refused to do, and who had walked away unhappy. There were always some who walked away unhappy. When you made a stand, there were always costs, and some of the costs were debts other people kept on your behalf, holding them through the years, waiting for a moment when the accounting made sense to settle. 25 years. Someone had carried this for 25 years. That was a particular kind of hate, the patient kind, the kind that doesn't rush because it doesn't have to. Jack walked back to his truck. He drove to the shop. He went in through the back door, made coffee, sat down at his workbench, and started making calls. Emily came in at 4 that afternoon. She saw the expression on his face and didn't ask about the attorney right away. She set her bag down and sat across from him on a stool and said, "What happened?" "Nothing yet," he said. Jack. He looked at her. He'd known her 6 years. She had never pushed him the way some people push, trying to get past the perimeter. She'd always seemed to understand that the perimeter was part of what made him functional. But today, something in her face told him she'd reached the edge of what she was willing to leave unasked. "Who were you," she said, "before Red Valley?" The question sat between them. Jack wrapped both hands around his coffee mug, thought about where to start, thought about all the places you could start a story like his and how different it sounded depending on where you chose to begin. Someone who believed that communities protect themselves, he said, that when institutions fail and the law doesn't reach, there's still something that can. Something that runs on loyalty instead of power, on reputation instead of money. He paused. I believed that, and for a long time I was right. And then I saw what happens when those same things get pointed in the wrong direction, and it cost people I cared about, and I decided I was done. Emily was quiet for a moment. You were in a club, she said. I was respected by several, he said. I wasn't in one. He thought about how to explain it. A bridge between groups that needed to coexist. Someone people called when things were about to go wrong and they wanted another option. A peacemaker. Something like that. She absorbed this. And now someone from that world is using Hayes to get to you. He looked at her. You're quick. I do taxes, she said. You follow the money long enough, you figure out who's actually angry. She leaned forward slightly. What do you need? It was the same question Hector had asked. The same question asked by a completely different kind of person, and it landed the same way with the weight of something meant genuinely. I need to understand why, Jack said. The who I'm starting to see. The why I don't have yet. Can I help with that? The financial side of HV development, if you could pull anything public. Corporate filings, registered agents, subsidiary relationships. I can do that, she said. She was already reaching for her bag. Give me until tomorrow morning. She left. The shop got quiet again. Jack turned to the Harley. He pulled the tarp back all the way this time and left it off. He found his parts list and his notes, and he started going through what he'd need to put it right. A new headlight, lens, a seat replacement, or a skilled leather worker. who could repair the cut cleanly, and for the tank, a careful color match, and someone with an extremely steady hand. The tank he'd do himself. He'd match the paint himself. He'd trace the pinstripe himself if it killed him. Sarah had painted it freehand. Jack would fix it freehand. That was the deal. As he worked, the first call came in from someone he hadn't spoken to in 12 years. A man out of Flagstaff. 2 sentences he'd heard, and he was asking if Jack needed anything. Then another call, a man from Albuquerque, brief and simple. He'd heard, he was asking. Then a text from a number he didn't have saved. The message was 4 words. Just say the word. Jack didn't answer any of them yet. He set the phone on the bench and kept working. But the silence in the shop felt different now. Less like absence, more like the moment before an engine catches that held breath, that gathering the instant before everything turns over and the machine comes alive. By Tuesday morning, there were 6 Harleys parked on Clement Street. Jack didn't put them there. Nobody asked him. Nobody called to say they were coming. They simply appeared the way things appear when word moves through channels that don't run on social media or public announcement, through calls made to specific people who call specific others, a chain of connection that had been dormant for 25 years and was now slowly and with the deliberate pace of people who do not rush because they don't have to coming wake. Victor Hayes drove past Clement Street that morning on his way to a meeting. He looked at the bikes. He looked at the shop. He kept driving. But when he got to his meeting, he was 6 minutes late, and the man who worked for him noticed that his hands, when he set them flat on the conference table, weren't quite steady. The man who noticed was careful not to say anything about it, but he noticed. And that evening, the man made his own call to a number in Colorado Springs, to a man named Dennis Pruitt. "Something is happening in Red Valley," the man said. "Something Hayes doesn't understand." Pruitt was quiet for a moment on the other end. "No," he said finally, "something is starting." He paused. "Tell Hayes to back off the shop. Tell him to back off now before he has no idea what's already been set in motion." The man relayed the message to Hayes the following morning. Hayes laughed. "It's one old mechanic," Hayes said, "and some bikes parked on a street. I'm not backing off from that." The man who worked for Hayes said nothing, but he started looking at job listings that afternoon, because he had grown up in a place where men like the one across the street from HV Development's project site existed, and he knew in the specific way that only certain people know certain things, that whatever Victor Hayes thought he was dealing with, he was wrong about the scale of it. I was very wrong about the scale of it. And by Wednesday, when the 6 bikes on Clement Street had become 11, and by Thursday when they had become 19, and by Friday morning, when Jack Whitmore opened his shop at 6 and found 23 Harleys parked along the full length of his block, some with riders sitting on them and some empty, but facing the street like an answer to a question nobody had asked out loud yet. By that point, even Victor Hayes had stopped laughing. He just didn't know yet what to do about it. And that, as it turned out, was the most dangerous position a man like him could be in. Victor Hayes did not get where he was by panicking. He'd built HV Development from a single strip mall acquisition in 2004 into a $40 million operation spanning 6 states, and not 1 inch of that ground had been given to him. He'd taken it, deal by deal, block by block, negotiation by negotiation, and when negotiation didn't work, by the application of pressure in the precise places where pressure produced results. He understood people the way a surgeon understands tissue, as something to be cut through cleanly, efficiently, with the right tool for the right moment. He had never met a problem that more money or more pressure couldn't solve. So when he sat in his temporary office on Friday morning, a rented suite on the 4th floor of the only office building in Red Valley, with a window that gave him a clear line of sight down toward Clement Street, and counted 23 motorcycles parked along the block surrounding Whitmore Motor Works, he did not panic. He told himself he was not panicking. He poured his second coffee and looked at the bikes and made himself think about it analytically. It was theater, he decided. It was a show of solidarity, the kind of thing that looked impressive and meant nothing. People showed up for things. They rallied around underdogs. It was human nature, and human nature was predictable, and predictable things could be managed. He called his site director, a man named Frank Okafor, and told him to proceed with the permit applications for the next phase of the project. He called his attorney and asked for an update on the regulatory complaints. He called his PR firm and asked for messaging around the development's community benefits. He did not call Dennis Pruitt back. Pruitt had called twice Thursday evening. Hayes had let both calls go to voicemail. He listened to the first one, which was Pruitt telling him in a calm and specific voice to stand down from the Whitmore property immediately. He hadn't listened to the second one. He didn't need to be told twice to do something he wasn't going to do once. What Hayes didn't know, what he had no way of knowing from his fourth-floor window with his second coffee and his analytical calm, was that at 6:15 that same Friday morning, Jack Whitmore had received a visit that changed the shape of everything. The man's name was Arthur Reyes, and he was 71 years old, and he came into the shop the way very few men come into any space, with the particular gravity of someone whose presence reorganizes the room without effort, without intention, simply by the fact of being there. Jack had heard the bike before he heard the knock, a Harley-Davidson CVO Road Glide tuned to a specific note that Jack recognized immediately because he'd helped tune that bike himself 17 years ago in a shop in Durango that no longer existed. He'd set down his coffee and stood up from his stool before the knock came, and when Arthur walked through the bay door, Jack said nothing for a moment, just looked at him. Arthur looked back. The years were on him, more silver, more lines, a slight favoring of the left knee that hadn't been there before, but his eyes were exactly the same, dark and still and reading everything. "Jack," Arthur said. "Arthur," Jack said. They shook hands, not the quick grip of casual acquaintance, the kind of handshake that holds for a moment that says what a room full of words couldn't say as efficiently. "You didn't have to come," Jack said. "Yes, I did," Arthur said. He looked at the Harley in the corner. The new headlight lens Jack had sourced was sitting on the workbench, still in its packaging. The seat was off the bike, waiting on a leather worker out of Montrose who was coming Saturday. The tank had been stripped down to primer on the scratch section, ready for the color match Jack was going to do himself. Arthur looked at all of it, taking inventory. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Jack told him. All of it: Hayes, the inspections, the note on Dell's windshield, the 4 young men, the lighter Hector's reading of the symbol, Cal Briggs's call, Dennis Pruitt's connection to HV development. He told it straight through without editorializing the way he told things, letting the facts carry their own weight. Arthur listened without interrupting once. When Jack finished, Arthur was quiet for 30 seconds, a full 30 seconds of silence, from a man who had spent 40 years in situations where silence meant something. "Pruitt," Arthur said finally. "Pruitt," Jack confirmed. "I always thought that one would come back around." "Why?" Jack said. "What do you know that I don't?" Arthur looked at him. "What do you remember about the West Texas situation, the whole thing, not just your piece of it?" "I remember I talked 2 groups off a collision that would have put people in the ground. I remember Pruitt was running something on the side that was going to come out in the open if it happened. I remember he was angry about the resolution because the piece meant his side operation got shut down. He lost money. He lost leverage." Jack paused. "I remember he said something when it was over. I didn't think much of it at the time." "What did he say?" Jack thought back 25 years, a parking lot in West Texas, 4 in the morning, the aftermath of something that had taken 3 days to unravel. Pruitt walking to his truck with the specific walk of a man who's been beaten but refuses to show it. Turning back, 1 sentence. "He said, 'This isn't finished,'" Jack said, "and I thought he meant the situation. I thought he was talking about the feud he hadn't been allowed to finish." Arthur shook his head slowly. "He was talking about you," he said. "Jack, after you left, after you walked away from everything, Pruitt rebuilt what you shut down. Slowly, carefully, moved it into legitimate-looking structures. That's how he met Hayes. Hayes's development company is not entirely but partially a vehicle for moving Pruitt's money. Has been for about 4 years." Jack absorbed this. "So Hayes isn't just a developer who wants my property. Hayes is a developer who wants your property because Pruitt told him to want it." Arthur's voice was even. "And Pruitt wants it because you're on it. It was always about finding you. The property is just the pretext." The shop was absolutely quiet. "He spent 25 years looking for me," Jack said. "Not constantly, but consistently." Arthur met his eyes. "You humiliated him. Not publicly, you were never that kind of man. But in the world that mattered to him, the world where his reputation was his currency, you took something from him that he couldn't earn back. And men like Pruitt, Jack, they don't let that go. They put it away and they wait for the right moment. Jack stood up from his stool and walked to the workbench and stood there with his hands flat on the surface. He was thinking fast, moving through it, the way his mind had always worked when the shape of a problem became clear. Not in straight lines, but in the branching pattern of consequence, each thread leading to its next result. He didn't just want the property, Jack said. He wanted me to fight. He wanted me to come out. The damage to the bike, that wasn't just about pressuring me to sell. That was bait. Arthur said nothing, which was its own answer. He wanted to see if I'd react the way I used to react, Jack said. He wanted to know if I still had it in me to call people, to bring people in, to make it into something bigger than one man's shop. He paused. And now I have. Yes, Arthur said quietly. Now you have. Jack turned around and looked at him. Is that what he wanted all along, to draw me out, get me to make noise, and then expose whatever I'm involved in to the people who've been looking for Pruitt for years? Arthur said it simply. There are people, Jack, federal people, who have been trying to build a case on Pruitt's operation for 3 years. They know the money moved through HV development. They haven't been able to connect it in a way that sticks. If Pruitt can create a situation that puts you at the center of something visible, something that looks like a biker organization applying pressure to a legitimate business development, he creates a narrative. He makes you the problem. He draws the scrutiny away from himself and onto you. Jack stared at him. He's not trying to destroy you, Arthur said. He's trying to use you as cover. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things, the kind that settles into the corners of a room and stays there. How long have you known this? Jack said. I found out Wednesday, Arthur said. That's why I'm here. Who else knows? Cal Briggs, Hector, a few others. Arthur paused. And one more person you should know about. The one more person arrived at the shop at 10:30 that morning while Arthur was still there. He drove a plain sedan, which was the first thing Jack noticed. Not a bike. A 4-door American sedan, dark blue, nothing distinctive about it, except that it was too clean for a town like Red Valley, where the roads turned everything dusty by April. The man who got out was somewhere in his late 40s, medium build, the kind of forgettable face that Jack recognized immediately as cultivated forgettability. He came through the bay door and looked at Arthur first, then at Jack. Mr. Whitmore, he said, my name is Daniel Cho. I'm with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. He produced a credential case and held it open. I've been working a case that involves, among other things, a man named Dennis Pruitt and a company called HV Development. I was hoping we could talk. Jack looked at the credential, then at Arthur. Arthur gave him a small nod. This was the person he'd met. Sit down, Jack said. Cho sat. He had a tablet with him, and he set it face down on the workbench, the gesture of someone who wants to have a conversation before a presentation, which Jack appreciated. I'll be direct, Cho said. We've known about Pruitt's connection to Hayes for about 18 months. We have documentation of money movement that strongly suggests HV Development has been used to launder proceeds from Pruitt's operations, which have evolved significantly since the 90s. And now primarily involve fraudulent investment schemes targeting retirement funds in 4 states. Jack's jaw tightened slightly. Retirement funds. He thought about Gloria Park and her 32 years in Red Valley, Del Prescott and his VFW, the kind of people whose savings were in exactly the places Pruitt fed on. What do you need from me? Jack said. Honestly, I need you to not do anything that gives Pruitt the narrative he's trying to build. Cho leaned forward. He wants this to look like organized intimidation by a biker network. If that story gets traction, if it becomes the thing reporters write about, it drowns out the story we're trying to tell, which is about financial crimes with real victims. So you want me to stand down, Jack said. So you want me to stand down, Jack said. I want you to stand exactly where you are, Cho said. Don't escalate, don't retaliate. Let us handle Pruitt. He paused. But I also want to know about those 4 young men, the ones who damaged your property, because one of them, based on your description and what we've been able to pull from Hayes' communication records, is connected to Pruitt directly. He's not just a hired hand, he's a runner. He moves things for Pruitt. If we can place him at your shop that night, it puts Pruitt's fingerprints on the harassment operation, which is the thread we've been missing. Jack thought about the 4 of them, the one near the door, the watcher, the one who hadn't participated but had watched with the careful attention of someone keeping an accounting. The one by the door, Jack said, young, maybe 22, Left-handed, he kept his weight on his right side like people do when they're used to reaching across. Dark jacket. He had a small scar near his right eyebrow, maybe an inch horizontal. Cho was writing. Anything else? I was the only one who looked scared, Jack said. Not of me, of what he was part of. He knew something the others didn't about what might happen. Cho looked up. That's useful. That's very useful. He paused. How do you notice things like that? Arthur, who had been quiet since Cho arrived, made a sound that was almost a laugh. Jack said nothing. One more thing, Cho said. He picked up the lighter that was still sitting on the workbench. He'd clocked it the moment he sat down. Jack had seen him look at it, and he'd waited until now to address it. This was left at your shop the night of the vandalism. Yes. Cho turned it over, looked at the symbol, set it back down. This is Pruitt's mark, he said. He has them made, gives them to people he considers his. It's been his thing for 30 years, a calling card essentially. Something traceable if you know what you're looking at. He met Jack's eyes. He wanted you to find this. He wanted you to know it was him. He wanted me scared, Jack said. Did it work? Jack looked at him evenly. No. Cho studied him for a moment. No, he said quietly. I don't imagine it did. He stood pocketing his tablet. I'm going to ask you for something, Mr. Whitmore. And I want to be clear that it's a request, not a demand. You have every legal right to do what you've been doing, having people park on a public street, operating your business, pursuing your regulatory complaint. None of that is my business. He paused. But if anything happens, if Pruitt makes direct contact, if Hayes escalates in a way that threatens you personally, if anything changes, I need you to call me before you respond. He left a card, plain white, just the number. After he left, the shop was quiet for a long moment. Arthur stood up and stretched and said, Well, Jack agreed. Federal involvement changes things. It complicates things, Jack had said. There's a difference. Arthur looked at him. What are you going to do? Jack picked up the card and the lighter. He held one in each hand, considering them. What he asked, he said, stand where I am, don't escalate. He set the lighter down and kept the card. But I'm not calling the bikes off. The people who came here came on their own. That's their choice. And if Pruitt decides federal scrutiny is a reason to accelerate his plan rather than abandon it, then we'll deal with that, Jack said. Arthur nodded slowly. He understood the answer. It was the same answer Jack had given in various forms for 30 years. The one that said, I'll handle what comes when it comes and I won't flinch from it and I won't go looking for it either. I'm staying in town, Arthur said. Don't argue with me. I wasn't going to, Jack said. Bam. Hayes called a meeting. He did it the way he did everything, decisively, with the confidence of someone who believes that convening the right people in the right room produces the right outcome. He called it for Monday at 11 at the rented suite, and the people he called were his attorney, his site director, Frank Okafor, the city planning liaison he'd been working with for 3 months, and separately by phone an hour before the meeting, Dennis Pruitt. The call with Pruitt lasted 9 minutes. Hayes paced while he talked. His assistant, watching through the glass partition, counted 12 full circuits of the office. When Hayes came out of the call, he was calm. The concentrated, deliberate calm of a man who has been told something that frightened him and has decided not to show it. He sat at his desk and stared at the wall for 4 minutes. Then he called Frank Okafor. The Whitmore property, Hayes said. We're going to need a different approach. Different how? Frank said. Direct. Hayes paused. I want a face-to-face with Whitmore, not an offer. A conversation. I want to understand who I'm dealing with. Frank was quiet for a moment. Frank was the kind of man who had been working for people like Hayes long enough to develop a specific instinct for when the ship was listing, and right now that instinct was making noise. Is that wise? He said carefully. Given the attorney his side has engaged, going direct without. Schedule it, Hayes said. Tuesday, his shop. Frank scheduled it. Jack received the call Monday afternoon and said yes immediately, which told Emily when he told her about it that he'd been expecting it. He wants to read you, she said. They were in the shop, her with her findings from the corporate research she'd done him, with a cup of coffee, going cold beside him. He wants to figure out what you know and how scared you are. Then he'll find out both things, Jack said. Emily spread out the papers she'd brought. Corporate filings, registered agent records, a web of subsidiary relationships that she'd mapped by hand on a legal pad in her neat, precise handwriting. HV Development has 4 subsidiaries. 3 of them are straightforward property holding companies, standard structure. The 4th one is interesting. She pointed to a name on the pad, Redstone Capital Partners. Registered in Delaware, operating address in Colorado Springs. No listed properties. No real estate holdings. Its stated purpose is investment management and asset facilitation. Boom! Pruitt's money, Jack said. I don't know that for a fact, Emily said carefully. But the capitalization of HV Development increased by about $8 million in the 18 months after Redstone came into the structure. In the Red Valley project, this specific project was approved internally 3 weeks after Redstone's first significant transfer to HV's operating account. Jack looked at her. How did you get this? Public filings, she said. Delaware Corporate Registry, Colorado Secretary of State, SEC disclosures for the investment management registration. All of it's public. You just have to know where to look and be willing to spend a weekend looking. Does Cho know about Redstone? I don't know what Cho knows. She paused. But I'd guess yes. Jack picked up his phone and called Cho's number. Cho answered on the second ring. Redstone Capital Partners, Jack said. A silence on the other end. Where did that come from? Public filings. Someone was willing to spend a weekend. Another silence. Mr. Whitmore, if you're sharing this with me, I'm going to share something with you in return. Cho's voice had changed, less formal, more direct, the voice of someone who's decided to move from one register to another. We got a warrant on Pruitt's communications Thursday morning. He knows we have Redstone. He also knows that Hayes's direct approach to your property, the vandalism, the regulatory pressure, has left fingerprints we can use. He's trying to decide whether to cut Hayes loose. A pause. He's also been in contact with someone who knows you. Someone from a long time ago who I think you'd want to know about. Who? Jack said. A man named Carter Walsh. Ring any bells? Carter Walsh. Jack set down his coffee cup very carefully. Carter Walsh, 16 years ago, a situation in New Mexico that had nothing to do with Pruitt, but had everything to do with the way certain people in certain worlds kept track of favors and debts. Jack had done something for Carter Walsh that Carter Walsh had never been able to repay. Had never been asked to repay because Jack didn't work that way. But the debt had sat on Carter's books all these years, the way debts do for men with that kind of conscience. What's Walsh got to do with this? Jack said. He's been feeding Pruitt information about you, Cho said. Low-level stuff mostly. Your location, your business. For the past 2 years. A pause. He came to us last week, voluntarily, said his conscience finally ran out. He's given us a full account of what he told Pruitt and when. It's the kind of testimony that builds a timeline we've been missing. Another pause. He also wanted me to tell you something if I spoke to you. He said, tell Jack I'm sorry. And tell him the reason I kept doing it was because Pruitt told me he'd make sure Jack was protected as long as I cooperated. Tell him I was an idiot, and I know it. Jack stood in the middle of his shop and felt the particular cold of betrayal. Not rage, not grief, just the clear cold of understanding how the thing had actually happened. Walsh had been trying to protect him the only way he thought he had left. All right, Jack said. Are you all right? Cho asked. I said all right, Jack said. It means yes, and I heard you, and let's move on. Cho moved on. The meeting Hayes wants Tuesday, go to it. Let him talk. Whatever he says, don't reveal what you know about Pruitt's connection. Just let him talk and listen. And if he makes another offer, tell him you'll think about it, Cho said. Give us 72 hours after that meeting. That's all I'm asking. Jack agreed and hung up. Emily had been watching him through the whole call, reading his face the way she'd been learning to read it over 6 years, getting marginally better at it, one conversation at a time. Walsh, she said. He looked at her. He was surprised, and then he wasn't. She was sharp, and she'd been in the room long enough to pick up the shape of the conversation. Someone I trusted, he said, who did something stupid for what he thought were the right reasons. She absorbed that. Are you angry? I thought about it honestly. No, he said. He was surprised to find it was true. I'm tired of how long this has been going on without me knowing it. But no, not angry. Emily reached across the workbench and put her hand briefly on his arm, just for a second. Then she pulled it back and started gathering her papers with the brisk efficiency she used when she was feeling something she wasn't ready to discuss. The meeting Tuesday, she said. I want to be there. Emily, not in the meeting, outside. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking permission, Jack. I'm telling you. He looked at her, thought about arguing, decided it wasn't worth it, and more than that, decided he didn't actually want her to be somewhere else. Fine, he said. She nodded, satisfied. She picked up her bag and her papers. At the bay door, she stopped without turning around. Carter Walsh, she said. Whatever he did, you're not going to let it matter, are you? It wasn't quite a question. He was scared, Jack said. People do things when they're scared. She turned it around and looked at him, and something in her face had shifted, the same shift he'd noticed before, the one that went past the professional line into something more personal that she kept carefully managed. You're a very strange man, she said. So I've been told. She left. Jack turned to the Harley. He picked up a fine grit sanding block and started working on the primer. Small, careful circular motions. The kind of work that required attention and produced visible progress if you were patient enough and precise enough and willing to spend the time it actually took instead of the time you wished it took. He worked for 3 hours. At 6 o'clock, headlights swept through the bay door. Not a car, bikes, 2 of them pulling up alongside the 23 already on the street. By 7, there were 31. Jack turned off his work light and stood in the dark shop for a moment, listening to the sound of voices on the street outside, low. Unhurried, the particular conversational sound of people who have arrived somewhere and intend to stay. He couldn't see them clearly from inside, but he could hear them, and the sound of them was something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time. It was the sound of people who'd decided something. Who'd decided without being asked, without being organized, without a meeting or a vote or a directive from anyone, that this corner of this street in this small Colorado town was a place worth showing up for. Jack picked up the lighter from the workbench. Pruitt's mark. His calling card. His message across 25 years of patient, simmering hatred. Jack turned it over in his hand once. Then he set it down in the center of the workbench where he could see it clearly. I wanted to be able to look at it Tuesday morning before the meeting. He wanted to remember exactly what this had always been about. Not a property, not a development project, not money. A man who couldn't stand that someone had once made him do the right thing. And another man who'd spent 25 years being exactly what he was, quietly, without apology, without announcement, in a small shop at the end of Clement Street. Tomorrow was Monday, Tuesday was the meeting. And by Tuesday evening, in ways that Victor Hayes still didn't fully understand, and Dennis Pruitt understood all too well, everything was going to be different. Monday came in cold and bright, the kind of Colorado morning that feels like the world is trying to warn you about something. Jack was at the shop by 5:30. An hour before his usual time. He didn't examine why. He just got up, made coffee in the dark kitchen of his house, 6 blocks from Clement Street, drove in and started working on the Harley's tank by the light of his bench lamp while the rest of the town was still asleep. The color match had taken him 4 attempts over the weekend. He'd mixed small test batches on cardboard, holding them against the undamaged section of the tank until he got it right. Not just the hue, but the depth, the way the original paint had oxidized slightly over 30 years into something richer and less glossy than fresh burgundy. Sarah hadn't used auto paint. She'd used artist paint, the kind from the art supply store in Denver, mixed with a lacquer base that Jack had sourced for her because he'd wanted it to last. It had lasted. Even the scratched sections, when he sanded back to primer, showed the old layers underneath like geological strata, her original coat, the clear over it. 30 years of careful waxing compressed into something almost geological. He worked a touch up in thin layers. Patient, methodical. The way you do something that matters. At 7, Del Prescott's truck appeared on the street outside. Del got out and came in and poured himself a coffee from Jack's pot without asking, because they were past the asking stage, and he sat on the stool and watched Jack work, and neither of them said anything for 20 minutes. Then Del said, "Meetings today." "Tomorrow," Jack said without looking up. "You ready?" Jack considered the question with the same care he was giving the paint. "I'm ready to listen," he said. Del made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite doubt. He drank his coffee. "Arthur Reyes is outside, has been since 6, sitting on his bike." Jack paused with his brush in mid-stroke. He didn't have to do that. "No," Del said, "he didn't." Jack finished the stroke, set the brush down, looked at the repair. It was close, very close. By tomorrow, it would be dry enough to assess clearly. He'd do the pinstripe last. That was the part he was most afraid of. Not because it was technically the hardest, but because it was hers, and whatever he put there would be his interpretation of what she'd done, and he didn't want to interpret it. He wanted to restore it. There was a difference that mattered enormously to him, and probably looked identical to anyone else. He cleaned the brush and turned around. Dell, he said. Dell looked at him. When this is over, whatever over looks like, I need you to know something. Dell waited. The people who showed up here didn't do it for me. Not really. They did it because of what this is about, which is the same thing it's always been about, whether a man can hold on to something that's his when someone with more money decides they want it. He paused. I just want you to understand that I know the difference. Dell looked at him for a long moment. Jack, he said, you've been fixing my bike for 8 years. You fixed it for free the year Margaret got sick and I couldn't come up with the cash. You didn't make a thing of it. You didn't mention it until I did. He paused. Don't tell me this isn't personal. Jack didn't answer that, but something in his face moved. Dell got up, rinsed his cup, set it on the drain board, and went back outside without saying anything else. Some things didn't need more words after they'd been said. Emily arrived at 8:15 with 2 things of coffee from the diner across the street and a folder that she set on the workbench and opened without ceremony. I found something last night, she said. After I left, I went back to the Redstone filings. She pointed to a section she'd highlighted in yellow. Redstone Capital Partners has a silent general partner. It took me a while to find it because it's buried under 2 layers of registered agents, but I got there. The silent GP is a trust. The trust is administered by an attorney in Colorado Springs. She looked at him. The attorney's name is Margaret Pruitt. Jack stared at her. Dennis Pruitt's ex-wife, Emily said. They divorced 9 years ago, but she's still administering his trust. She paused. Which means either they have a financial arrangement that survived the divorce, or the divorce itself was structured specifically to put assets in her name to protect them from seizure. Asset protection, Jack said. Very sophisticated asset protection. The kind that takes real legal planning. She paused. I sent this to Cho an hour ago. He called me back in 11 minutes, which I think means it was important. What did he say? He said, and I'm quoting exactly Ms. Castillo, where did you learn to read corporate structure? She allowed herself a small, brief smile. And then he said this was the link between Pruitt's personal assets and the Redstone account that they'd been looking for. The one that closes the loop on the money trail. Jack looked at her, really looked at her, the kind of look he didn't often give people because it required letting something down that he normally kept up. You did that last night, he said, on a Sunday night after a full week. I'm an accountant, she said. We have strange hobbies. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the folder. Cho also said the warrant on Pruitt's communication has turned up contact between Pruitt and Frank Okafor. Hayes' site director, not Hayes directly, Okafor. Jack went still. Okafor has been feeding Pruitt operational updates on the Red Valley project, Emily said. Specifically around the Whitmore property, when the inspections were scheduled, how you responded, when the 4 young men were sent. She paused. Okafor is Pruitt's man inside Hayes' operation. Hayes doesn't know. Hayes doesn't know, Jack repeated slowly. According to Cho, Hayes thinks Pruitt is a legitimate investor who introduced him to a profitable development opportunity. He doesn't know about the money laundering. He doesn't know Redstone is dirty. He doesn't know Okafor is reporting to Pruitt. She paused. He's either telling the truth or he's a very good liar. Cho thinks he's telling the truth. Jack sat down on his stool and was quiet for a moment, moving through the implications. Hayes didn't know, which meant the meeting tomorrow was going to go in a direction Hayes hadn't planned for because Hayes was walking in thinking he was dealing with a stubborn mechanic and a few sympathetic bikers. And he was actually walking into the unraveling of an operation that had been running under his company for 4 years without his knowledge. Does this change what Cho wants from the meeting? Jack said. He wants you to let Hayes talk first. Don't lead. Don't reveal. Let Hayes say whatever he came to say, and then ask him one question. Emily looked up from the folder. Ask him about Frank Okafor. Just that. Cho said ask him how long Okafor has worked for him and how he came to be hired. And watch his face. Jack thought about it. What does Cho think Hayes' face will do? He thinks Hayes already knows something is wrong with Okafor and hasn't been able to name it, Emily said. He thinks the question will land on something Hayes has been carrying and will crack it open. Jack nodded slowly. He understood the tactic. It was the same one he'd used himself 30 years ago, in rooms very different from a small repair shop in Colorado. The precise question that doesn't demand an answer, but creates a space where the truth falls into. All right, he said. Emily closed the folder and looked at him with the direct, clear look she'd been giving him more often lately, the one that didn't ask permission before it felt what it felt. How are you, she said. Not professionally, not as his accountant, the other way. He thought about answering the way he usually answered, decided against it. I've been better, he said honestly. 25 years is a long time to carry something without knowing you're carrying it. She nodded. Carter Walsh, she said. You're going to have to decide what to do about him. Already decided. Which is nothing, Jack said. He made a mistake. He's trying to fix it. That's all anyone can do. Emily looked at him for a moment. You know, most people would be furious, she said. Most people spend a lot of energy on fury, Jack said. I've got a tank to finish painting. She laughed. It was a short, surprise laugh, the kind that comes out before you've decided to let it out. She covered it quickly, but he'd seen it, and something in him was glad. The second thing that happened Monday, the thing that nobody planned and nobody saw coming, happened at 11:15 when a car pulled up on Clement Street and a man got out who made Arthur Reyes, sitting on his bike in the morning cold, stand up straight for the first time in an hour. The man was 63. He had the bearing of someone who'd spent decades earning the right to walk into rooms without announcing himself. He wore civilian clothes, plain jacket, dark jeans, but they sat on him the way civilian clothes sit on men who spent the largest part of their lives in something else. He came through the bay door and looked at Jack and said, You don't know me. No, Jack said. My name is Martin Gall. I was a federal agent for 22 years, DEA mostly. I retired 3 years ago. He paused. I know Daniel Cho. He called me last night and told me what's happening here. I'm not here officially. I'm here because in 2003, I was running an operation in New Mexico that went sideways in a way that would have cost 2 undercover agents their lives if a civilian hadn't intervened. Jack said nothing. That civilians, Gall said, was you. He paused. I never got to say this at the time because the way it worked out, putting your name anywhere near a federal operation wasn't something that would have helped you. So I didn't. And then the years went on. He stopped, seemed to choose his next words with particular care. Cho told me about Pruitt, about the 25 years, about what's been done to your shop. His jaw was set. I want you to know that there are people in this people who have been quiet about you for a long time because that's what you wanted, who are not going to be quiet anymore. Not about this. Jack looked at him for a long moment. The 2003 situation in New Mexico. He'd filed it in the same place he filed everything in the part of his memory that contained the things he'd done and then walked away from without looking back. He hadn't known the 2 men were federal. He'd known they were in danger. That was the only calculus that had mattered. You didn't owe me a trip out here, Jack said. No, Gall agreed. I didn't. He said it in a way that made clear that was exactly why he'd come. He stayed for 40 minutes, drank coffee, talked to Arthur in the low, direct way of 2 men who recognized the same kind of history in each other. Before he left, he shook Jack's hand again and said, tomorrow, whatever happens in that meeting, you won't be alone in what comes after. Jack believed him. Tuesday morning arrived the way consequential mornings arrive. No different from any other morning, to look at the same light, the same coffee, the same drive down empty streets. But the quality of the air felt different to Jack, charged in a way he recognized from a long time ago. The way the air feels before something breaks one way or another, and you find out what you're made of, or what the situation is made of, or whether the 2 things are compatible. He got to the shop at 6. Arthur's bike was already outside. Dell's truck. 2 more bikes he didn't recognize, but whose riders nodded to him as he went past. By 8 o'clock, there were 41 motorcycles on Clement Street. Not arranged, not organized. Just there the way of tide is just there, fact of the world, impersonal and total. Emily arrived at 9. She wore a dark blazer over her usual clothes, which told Jack she was treating this as something serious enough to dress for. And something about that, the simple, practical care of it, got to him in a way he didn't fully examine. Ready, she said. Let me finish this first, he said. He was at the tank. The repair coat was dry and matched. He had the pinstripe brush in his hand, a fine-tipped sable, the same kind Sarah had used that he'd ordered from the same art supply company in Denver. He stood in front of the tank. He put the brush down. He picked it up again. Emily watched him without saying anything. The pinstripe was a single continuous line. It ran the full length of the tank along the lower edge, curving with the contour. Sarah had done it in one motion, he knew, because he'd watched her do it, holding his breath, and she'd gone from one end to the other without lifting the brush. Her hands steady with the absolute confidence of someone who'd decided not to be afraid of making a mistake. Jack took a breath. He put the brush to the tank. I went from one end to the other without lifting it. When he stepped back, the line was there. It matched. Not perfectly, his hand was different from hers, and you could see that in the way the line moved slightly differently through the midpoint, where his steadiness was different from her steadiness. But it was close, it was honest. It was his best attempt to meet what she'd left, and in the end, that was what restoration was, not erasure of the damage, but the genuine effort to honor what had been there before. He set the brush down. Emily had been watching his face instead of the tank. When he turned around, she said simply and quietly, "It's beautiful." He looked at her. She looked back. They were in that place they'd been circling for months, the edge of something that neither of them had named yet, that didn't need to be named today, that could wait for a day that wasn't already carrying this much weight. And they both understood that simultaneously, and they both stepped back from the edge at the same moment, and it was fine. It was good. Some things keep better when you don't rush them. "Let's go," Jack said. Victor Hayes arrived at 11 on the dot. He came in Frank Okafor's truck, which Jack noted immediately. Not the Escalade, not his own vehicle. Okafor drove and Hayes was in the passenger seat, and the arrangement told Jack something about how Hayes was framing this meeting to himself. Casual, informal, a simple conversation between neighbors. Okafor stayed outside when Hayes came in. Jack had arranged the shop deliberately. Nothing staged, but nothing accidental either. The Harley sat in its corner tank, freshly repaired, pinstripe running, clean along the lower edge. New headlight lens, fitted new seat leather, done by the Montrose craftsman who'd come Saturday, and done the work in 2 hours with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd been repairing things his whole life. The bike looked right, it looked whole. Hayes would see it and understand that the damage he'd commissioned had been erased, and that the erasure had been a matter of will rather than expense. The tools were in their places. The shop smelled of oil and coffee, and the faint chemical note of fresh lacquer. Dell was sitting in the far corner on his stool, coffee in hand. He'd asked if he should leave, and Jack had said no. Arthur came in from outside and stood near the bay door with his arms loose at his sides, saying nothing, being present in the way that men like Arthur Reyes are present, as a fact, not a statement. Hayes looked at the room. He processed it in the quick, practiced way of someone who reads situations for a living. He clocked Dell. He clocked Arthur. He didn't show whatever it produced in him, but Jack saw his shoulders shift, a nearly invisible adjustment. "Mr. Whitmore," Hayes said. "Mr. Hayes," Jack said. "Coffee." "Sure," Jack poured. Hayes took the cup. They stood across the workbench from each other, and Hayes said, "I appreciate you agreeing to meet." "I appreciate you asking," Jack said. Hayes looked around the shop once more. "Nice place," he said, and this time it wasn't the appraiser's compliment he delivered the first time. There was something different in it, less contempt. Jack filed that. "I wanted to have a direct conversation," Hayes said, "without attorneys, without formal communications, just the two of us. I think we got off on the wrong foot." "All right," Jack said. Hayes set down his coffee cup. He had the manner of a man who has rehearsed this, who has thought through the shape of what he wants to say, and has organized it carefully. "I've been in development for 20 years, he said, "and I want to be honest with you. I've been more aggressive in this situation than I should have been. The inspections, the pressure on your customers, that wasn't appropriate. I'm not here to apologize for the business logic, but I am here to tell you that the execution went further than I authorized." Jack looked at him. "Did it?" "Yes," Hayes met his eyes. "I gave instructions to create regulatory pressure. I did not authorize harassment of your customers or," he paused, "the damage to your property. That was not something I approved." Jack was quiet for a moment. He looked at the Harley, then back at Hayes. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "who authorized it?" Hayes's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm looking into that." "Are you?" "Yes." Jack picked up his coffee cup. took a slow drink, set it down. "How long has Frank Okafor worked for you?" he said. The effect was immediate and unmistakable. Hayes's face didn't collapse, but something behind it shifted fundamentally. The particular movement of a man who has just heard a question land directly on the thing he's been trying not to look at. He was silent for 3 full seconds. "4 years, he said carefully. "How did you hire him?" Another silence, shorter but heavier. "He was referred," Hayes said. And then, because Hayes was a smart man, even if he was a compromised one, he said, "by Dennis Pruitt." The name fell into the room and sat there. Jack said nothing. Hayes looked at him, and the recalibration happening behind his eyes was visible now, happening too fast and too hard to be fully concealed. "You know about Pruitt," Hayes said. "Yes." "How much?" "Enough," Jack said. "Do you?" The question was the precise scalpel that Cho had predicted. Hayes took it in the way a man takes a cut. He wasn't expecting the shock before the pain. He picked up his coffee cup, set it back down. Without drinking, looked at the workbench surface for a moment and then looked up. "Tell me what you know," Hayes said. His voice had changed. The executive confidence was still there, but underneath it now was something else. The voice of a man who has just understood that the room he's in is not the room he thought he walked into. Jack looked at him steadily. "I think," he said, "that you need to talk to a lawyer before I answer that. Your own lawyer, not the one your company uses. A personal attorney." He paused. "Today, before anything else." Hayes stared at him. "I'm not your enemy, Mr. Hayes," Jack said. "I never was. I was just a man who didn't want to move." Hayes stood there for a moment that went on long enough to be something other than a moment. Then he said very quietly, "What has Pruitt done?" That, Jack said, "is genuinely not my place to tell you. But I'll say this, the people who know are closer than you think. And the next conversation you have after you walk out of here should be with a personal attorney." Hayes nodded, slowly. The nod of a man whose entire orientation toward a situation has just undergone a fundamental reversal. He picked up his jacket from where he'd set it on the workbench edge. He looked at the Harley for a long moment. At the repaired tank, the new headlight, the fresh leather on the seat. "Your bike looks good," he said. "It'll be all right," Jack said. Hayes walked to the bay door. He stopped and looked back. "Okafor," he said. "Outside, he drove me here." "I know," Jack said. "Should I be worried about being in a vehicle with him?" Jack looked at him. "Call the attorney first," he said, "then go from there." Hayes nodded once and walked out. Through the bay door, Jack watched him walk past his own truck. He said something to Okafor, short, direct. Then he took out his phone and walked to the far end of the parking area, putting distance between himself and Okafor, and made a call. Dell said from his corner, "That went somewhere you didn't expect." "It went where it needed to go," Jack said. Arthur hadn't moved from his position near the bay door. He was watching Okafor, who was sitting in the truck, with his hands on the wheel, watching Hayes on the phone, understanding from the posture and the distance exactly what was happening. Okafor's face, which Jack could see partially from where he stood, was the face of someone watching a door close. Jack called Cho. "Hayes just left," he said. "I asked about Okafor. He confirmed Pruitt referred him. He's making a call right now, probably to an attorney." Cho was quiet for a second. How did he take the Pruitt question? Like a man who'd been wondering why his house smelled wrong for 4 years and just found the source, Jack said. "Good," Cho said. "That's actually good. A cooperative Hayes is much more useful than a defensive one." A pause. "Jack, we're moving on Pruitt today. Warrant executed this morning in Colorado Springs. I wanted you to know." Jack held the phone for a moment without speaking. 25 years. Today. "Okafor," Jack said. "Federal agents are en route to that parking lot right now," Cho said. As if on cue, 2 vehicles turned onto Clement Street from the north. Plain sedans, dark blue, moving with the particular unhurried purpose of people who have already done the paperwork and are now simply completing a process. Okafor saw them. He watched them come. I didn't run. He didn't call anyone. He sat in the truck with his hands on the wheel and he watched the agents get out and walk toward him. And when they knocked on the window, he rolled it down and said something, and then got out of the truck and put his hands behind his back with the specific resignation of someone who has known for a while that this moment was coming and has decided not to pretend otherwise. Del Prescott stood up from his stool and came to the bay door and stood beside Jack and Arthur, and the 3 of them watched it happen together. "Is it over?" Del said. "Part of it," Jack said. Emily came around from the side of the building where she'd been waiting. She stopped beside Jack and looked at the scene on the street, at Okafor, at the agents, at Hayes standing 20 feet away, with his phone at his ear and his back to all of it, either because he was still on the call or because he was choosing not to watch. "Pruitt," she said to Jack quietly. "This morning," he said. She exhaled slowly. The sound of someone releasing something they'd been holding tighter than they realized. On the street, the 31 parked motorcycles sat silent and still. Their riders were standing now, some of them in the street, some on the sidewalk, watching what was happening, with the quiet attention of people who had come to be present for something and were being present for it. Nobody cheered, nobody spoke loudly, there was no performance to it. They were simply there the way they'd been there all week, the way certain people are there for certain things because the alternative, not being there, is not something they're capable of choosing. Arthur Barashus put a hand briefly on Jack's shoulder, said nothing, took his hand away. That was enough. That was exactly enough. Jack turned back inside. He went to the workbench. He picked up the lighter, Pruitt's lighter, with Pruitt's mark on the side, and he held it for a moment. Then he opened the drawer in the base of the bench and put it inside and closed the drawer. He didn't throw it away. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because objects like this were evidence of something that deserved to be remembered, not discarded. Maybe because 25 years of carrying something without knowing you were carrying it had left him with a different relationship to the weight of things than he'd had before. He picked up his coffee cup. Cold now, he drank what was left anyway. Outside, the sound of engines, not the federal sit-ins, bikes starting up one at a time, idling, settling into the particular harmonic that happens when multiple Harleys run in proximity. Each one individual, but overlapping into something collective, something that was more than the sum of its parts. They weren't leaving. They were just running, just being there in the engine-warm, sun-warm Tuesday morning on Clement Street in Red Valley, Colorado. Jack stood in his shop and listened to them. I thought about Sarah. He thought about what she would say if she could see the tank, right now the repaired section with the new pinstripe that was his hand's interpretation of hers. He thought she would look at it carefully and find the place where his line diverged from where her line had gone, and she would say something that was both accurate and kind, because that was what she did, because that was who she was. I thought she would also say, "You stayed. You held on to it. That's what matters." He believed she would be right. He put his coffee cup in the sink. He picked up a clean rag. He went to the Harley and began to polish the chrome on the front forks, working slowly, section by section, until the metal gave back his reflection in a way that was clear and true. The morning continued. The engines ran, and Clement Street held the way. It had always held by the accumulated weight of the people who refused to leave it. Part 5, The Legacy That Never Died. The news broke on Wednesday morning. Not in Red Valley first, in Red Valley News, moved through people before it moved through screens, but in the Colorado Springs Gazette, which ran a brief item about federal agents executing a search warrant at a Colorado Springs residence and business address connected to an ongoing financial crimes investigation. The item named Dennis Pruitt. It named Redstone Capital Partners. It did not name HV Development or Victor Hayes. But by Wednesday afternoon, the Denver Post had connected those dots in a follow-up piece that was considerably less brief, and by Wednesday evening, 3 television stations had vans parked on the edges of a story that was still assembling itself in real time. None of them came to Clement Street. Not yet. Jack suspected Cho had something to do with that, a quiet word in the right direction, keeping the cameras away from the part of the story that didn't need to be on camera. He was grateful for it. He had spent the better part of 25 years being no one in particular in a town that asked nothing of him except competence and honesty. And the idea of a news van parked outside Whitmore Motorworks sat badly with him in a way he couldn't entirely articulate. He found out about the first article from Carol, who brought a sandwich on Wednesday instead of Thursday because she said the situation had advanced the schedule. She set the sandwich on the workbench, pulled up the article on her phone, and held it out to him without comment. He read it standing up the way he read things that required quick processing. "Is that the man?" Carol said. "That's the man," Jack said, "and he's the reason for all of this." Part of it. Carol took her phone back. She looked at the sandwich she'd brought, then at Jack, then around the shop in the particular way she looked at things when she was trying to decide whether to say something she'd been holding for a while. "Jack," she said, "I've been bringing you sandwiches on Thursdays for 11 years. I know. In 11 years, I've never asked you anything personal. I know that too. She looked at him. Who are you really? Jack thought about how to answer that. He thought about all the versions of the answer, the complicated one, the partial one, the deflecting one. He looked at Carol, who was 63 and had run a dry cleaning business for 2 decades and had brought him a sandwich every Thursday for 11 years, simply because she decided early on that he was worth feeding. She deserved better than deflection. Someone who used to help people solve problems that the law couldn't reach, he said. And then someone who stopped. And then someone who had to decide whether the stopping was permanent or just long. Carol looked at him for a moment. And what did you decide? That some things you don't retire from, Jack said. You just change how you do them. Carol nodded, once the nod of a woman who has raised children and managed a business and weathered things and knows when an answer is as complete as it's going to get. She patted his arm once lightly and left. Jack ate the sandwich. It was turkey on wheat with too much mustard, which was always how Carol made it, and he'd never mentioned the mustard because it had never seemed worth mentioning. He ate the whole thing and felt inexplicably better. Carter Walsh called on Wednesday evening. Jack had known the call was coming. He'd been carrying the knowledge of it for 3 days, turning over in his mind what he would say when it arrived, running it from different angles, the way he ran everything methodically without sentimentality, trying to get to the true center of what he actually felt rather than what he thought he was supposed to feel. Jack, Walsh's voice was rough, not from age, from something being carried. Carter, Jack said, a long pause. I don't know where to start. Start in the middle, Jack said. That's usually easier. Walsh made a sound, a short, broken thing that wasn't quite a laugh. I told him where you were, he said, 2 years ago after he found out you were in Colorado. I didn't tell him the town right away. I stalled. I thought. He stopped. I thought if I gave him something, kept him satisfied, he'd leave you alone. He told me you were protected as long as I cooperated. I believed him. I know, Jack said. I was wrong. Yes. I should have called you. I should have warned you instead of Carter. Jack said it the way you say a name when you want someone to stop punishing themselves long enough to hear what you're actually saying. You made a bad choice for a reason you thought was good. That's a very human thing. I've done it. Most people have. You could have gotten hurt. I didn't. That's not Carter. Again, the same way. Firm, not unkind. Are you cooperating fully with Cho's team? Yes, full statement, everything. Then that's what matters now. That's the thing you can actually do. Jack paused. Are you all right personally? Another long silence, the kind where someone is trying to hold themselves together well enough to answer honestly. Not really, Walsh said. Not yet. You will be, Jack said. It takes time. How do you know? Because I've seen you in situations a lot worse than this, Jack said, and you came through them. Walsh was quiet for a moment. You're not angry, he said. Why aren't you angry? Jack thought about the answer to that. He'd thought about it for 3 days, and he had a real one now. Because anger takes the same energy as everything else, he said. And I'd rather spend it on something that moves forward. Walsh let out a long, slow breath. I'm sorry, Jack, he said. For what it's worth, for whatever that's worth, I'm sorry. It's worth something, Jack said. It's worth more than you think. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Walsh's daughter's new job, a bike Walsh had been rebuilding in his garage the way certain roads in New Mexico felt in October. The ordinary conversation of 2 men who had known each other a long time and needed to remember that what they had between them was larger than what had just happened to it. After Walsh hung up, Jack sat in the quiet of his house for a while, thinking about loyalty, about how it breaks and how it holds, and how the breaking is almost never simple, and the holding is almost always harder than it looks. I thought about the people who'd come to Clement Street without being asked. 31 motorcycles on a Tuesday morning, not because he'd called anyone, not because anyone had organized it, because word moved through channels built on something older than text messages, in social media and formal organizations, through the specific human channel of people who remembered what someone had done for them and who decided when the accounting came due to be there. I thought about what Arthur had said in the shop. You were someone who didn't walk away from things. And Dell's response, doesn't sound like something you should be trying to stop being. He sat with that for a long time, then he went to bed and slept better than he had in weeks. Thursday brought Victor Hayes, not to the shop, to Patricia Leong's office, where Hayes arrived at 9 in the morning with his personal attorney and an expression that had shed every layer of executive composure and was now just the expression of a man who needs to understand how bad things are. Leong called Jack at 10:15. He wants to meet, she said, formally with counsel present on both sides. He says he wants to make it right. What does making it right look like to him, Jack said. He hasn't fully articulated it yet, but his attorney reached out to Cho's office this morning and Hayes is cooperating fully with the federal investigation. He's given them Okafor's full personnel record, all communications he had access to, and his own account of every interaction with Pruitt. Leong paused. Cho told me off the record that Hayes' cooperation has been more useful than they expected. He genuinely didn't know what was moving through his company. I know, Jack said. He'd believed it when Hayes stood in his shop. Believed the quality of that specific shock, the kind you can't fully manufacture, even if you're good at manufacturing things. He wants to address the damage to your business and your property, Leong said, formally, without litigation if possible. Tell him I'll meet him, Jack said, but I want something from him first. What? Carol Hines, Jack said, the dry cleaner 2 doors down. Gloria parked the laundromat on the corner. The pottery shop that Hector Diaz's sister owned, she sold it under pressure 3 weeks ago. And the sporting goods space that Hayes bought 8 months ago. I want him to look at what happened to those businesses and tell me what he's prepared to do about them. Before we talk about my shop. Leong was quiet for a moment. Jack, that's my condition, he said. My shop is fine. I'm still here. Those people aren't. Another pause. I'll convey it, she said. The meeting happened Friday afternoon in Leong's conference room. Hayes came with his attorney, a sharp woman named Daniels, who specialized in corporate liability. Leong sat next to Jack. Emily had driven him there and was sitting in the waiting area outside, ostensibly reading something on her phone. Actually, Jack knew entirely focused on the conversation she couldn't hear through the wall. Hayes looked different from the man who'd walked into Jack's shop 2 weeks ago. Different even from the man who'd stood in the parking lot watching Okafor get arrested. There was something stripped from him, not just the confidence, but the insulation that confidence had provided. He looked like a man sitting closer to the actual surface of things than he was used to sitting. I had looked at the businesses Jack named. That was the first thing he said when he sat down. I had my team pull the full history of every acquisition and every pressure campaign in this district, he said. Going back 18 months, he set a folder on the table. Okafor ran it, all of it. I thought he was executing an aggressive but legal negotiation strategy. The inspections I knew about, I thought they were above-board regulatory review. The notes on customers' vehicles, the direct harassment I didn't know. I want to say that clearly and on the record. Leong said, noted. The pottery shop, Hayes said. Maria Diaz signed her sale agreement under circumstances that, had I known about them, I would not have permitted. He paused. I want to give her the opportunity to buy it back at the price she sold it for. If she wants the space back, it's hers. Jack looked at him. You'd take a loss on that. Yes, Hayes said simply. Why, Hayes met his eyes. Because it's the right thing, he said. And because a man standing in his shop last Tuesday told me I needed to think about what I actually knew and what I'd chosen not to look at. And I've been doing that for 4 days, and I don't like what I found. Jack said nothing. My attorney has advised me, Hayes continued, that admissions of this nature in a formal setting create liability. I'm making them anyway. He looked at Leong. I want to settle any claims related to Whitmore Motor Works comprehensively. The regulatory harassment, the property damage, the business disruption. I want a number that's fair, and I want to pay it. Leong named a number. Hayes' attorney made a counter-proposal. Leong held. Hayes looked at his attorney and then at Jack and said, accept it. His attorney looked at him. Accept it, Hayes said again. They accepted it. The settlement was signed before 5 o'clock. Not just for Whitmore Motor Works. With Leong's guidance and Hayes' cooperation agreements were drafted for Gloria Park, for Carol, for 3 other businesses on the block that had been pressured. Each one different. Each one addressing what had actually happened to that specific person. It was not fast work, and it was not simple work, but Hayes stayed in the room through all of it. He didn't check his phone. He didn't excuse himself. He stayed and he signed what needed to be signed, and when it was done, he looked like a man who had paid a debt he hadn't known he owed and was now figuring out what kind of person that made him. At the door, Hayes stopped and turned. He looked at Jack. I'm going to rebuild this project, he said, in the Red Valley development. but differently. I've been talking to the city planning office about a mixed-use structure that keeps the existing businesses in place and builds around them rather than replacing them." He paused. "I don't know if that matters to you." "It matters to the people who've been here 30 years, Jack said. Hayes nodded. He started to say something else, then seemed to decide against it. He extended his hand. Jack shook it. Hayes left. Emily was in the waiting room when Jack came out. She looked at his face and read it the way she'd been learning to read it, getting better at it, one conversation at a time. "Done," she said. "Done," he said. She stood up and they walked out together into the late afternoon. And the air was cold and clear the way Colorado air is in fall. The kind of cold that makes everything feel more actual, more precisely itself. They walked to her car and she drove him back to Clement Street, and neither of them needed to talk to fill the drive. And that silence was its own kind of thing, comfortable in the way that silences are comfortable between people who have moved past the stage of performing ease and arrived at the real thing. It has to. The twist that nobody expected came 10 days later. Not from Hayes, not from Pruitt, who was in federal custody in Denver, and whose case was moving through the machinery of justice with the slow, grinding certainty of something that had been a long time coming. Not from Okafor, who had taken a plea agreement and was cooperating. It came from Cal Briggs, the Iron Valley chapter leader out of Pueblo, who called Jack on a Saturday morning in October while Jack was drinking his first coffee of the day and watching the first light come through the shop windows. "You need to see something," Cal said. He came to the shop that afternoon. He brought a manila envelope, the old-fashioned kind, and he set it on the workbench and stepped back and let Jack open it. Inside were photographs, printouts of old photographs, the kind that had been scanned from physical prints. They were from the early 90s, the images slightly faded at the edges, the clothing and the hair dating them precisely. A group of men at a gathering, bikes in the background, a desert landscape, the flat light of somewhere in the southwest. Jack looked through them one at a time. In the third one, he saw himself, younger, darker hair, the same eyes. Standing with a group of men, he recognized some of their faces he could still name. Others had blurred with time. On his left was a man he'd forgotten entirely, a younger man, early 20s in the photo, with the kind of raw-edged presence that certain young men carry before life either disciplines it or destroys it. "Who is this?" Jack said, pointing. "Look at the back," Cal said. Jack turned the photo over. Someone had written names on the back in pencil, the handwriting small and neat. He ran his finger along them until he found the one that matched the face he'd pointed to. T. Hayes. Jack looked up. "Thomas Hayes," Cal said. "Victor Hayes' younger brother. He ran in those circles for about 3 years in the early 90s before he straightened out and got into business school." Cal paused. "He died in 2019. Motorcycle accident, nothing connected to any of this. But Victor Hayes has known who you were, not your current name, not your location, but your reputation, your history, since his brother talked about you. He's had a photograph of you for 30 years. Jack set the photo down. "Hayes didn't know Pruitt was using him to find you," Cal said. "That part is true. But Hayes coming to Red Valley, being drawn to this specific project, this specific block," Cal looked at him carefully. "Cho thinks it wasn't entirely coincidence. He thinks Hayes had some subconscious pull toward this place because of what his brother told him about you years ago, and Pruitt understood that and worked it." Jack looked at the photograph again. The young man with the raw-edged presence. Thomas Hayes dead now, at an age Jack couldn't calculate from the photo. In the picture, Thomas Hayes was looking at the camera, but his head was turned very slightly to the left toward where Jack was standing, as though in the moment before the shutter clicked, something Jack had said or done had caught his attention. "Does Victor know I've seen this?" Jack said. "No." Jack was quiet for a long time. He looked at the photo, at his own younger face in it, at the man on his left who died in 2019 and who had apparently talked to his brother about someone he'd met once at a gathering in the desert. Southwest talked about him enough that the brother had kept the photograph for 30 years. "What do I do with this?" Jack said. Cal looked at him steadily. "That's your call," he said. "I brought it because I thought you deserved to know the full shape of it. What you do with it is yours." Jack held the photo for a moment. Then he put it back in the envelope and set it on the workbench. He called Hayes. Hayes answered on the third ring. "Mr. Whitmore." "I want to show you something," Jack said. "Can you come to the shop?" Hayes came. Jack handed him the envelope without saying anything. Hayes opened it, went through the photos. When he got to the third one, he stopped. He stood at the workbench with the photo in his hand, and he didn't say anything for a very long time. And Jack watched his face move through things that were private and deep and had nothing to do with settlements or development projects or federal investigations. Tommy, Hayes said finally, just the name, quietly. How old was he in this, Jack said. 23. Hayes set the photo down very carefully. He talked about you after this. He said, Hayes stopped. Tried again. He said you were the first person he'd ever met who made him think about the difference between what you do and who you are. He looked up at Jack. He used those exact words. I've never forgotten them because he wasn't the kind of kid who talked that way. He wasn't a philosophical kid, but he said that. Jack looked at him. He got his act together 2 years after this photo, Hayes said. Finished his degree, got into real estate. He's actually how I got into it. I was the one who saw the business in it. Hayes's voice was steady, but the steadiness was the deliberate kind. When he died, I took over the projects he'd started. This district in Red Valley was one of his. He'd flagged it years ago as undervalued. I took it on because it was his. He paused. I didn't connect you to Tommy's story. I had his notes, his instincts, his sense of the place. And somewhere in the back of my mind, without ever knowing why, he stopped. Without knowing why you were drawn here, Jack said. Hayes looked at him. Yes. The shop was quiet. I didn't help your brother, Jack said. Not directly. I was just somewhere he was once. Whatever he took from it was something he found himself. I know, Hayes said. That's actually what he said. He said you didn't teach him anything. You just, Hayes looked for the word, demonstrated something by how you were. Jack picked up the photo and looked at it one more time. At Thomas Hayes on his left turned slightly toward him in the instant before the shutter clicked. He handed it back to Victor Hayes. Keep it, Jack said. Hayes took it carefully. He folded the envelope closed and held it against his chest with both arms the way you hold something you don't want to drop. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He walked out of the shop and drove away, and this time he was not a man who had failed to understand what he'd walked into. He was a man who had walked into something that had been waiting for him for a long time and had finally imperfectly, painfully, at significant cost, arrived at it. A year passed, the way years pass when you're living inside them, rather than looking back at them not as a single thing, but as an accumulation of individual days, each one adding something small to the shape of what a life becomes. Whitmore Motorworks was still on Clement Street, still opened at 6, still smelled of oil and coffee and the faint, warm metal scent of machines given back their purpose. The sign was still hand-painted. Jack had looked at it one morning in the fall and decided to repaint it himself, matching the original letterforms, the same slightly imperfect R in Works that had been there since he painted it the first time 14 years ago. Some things deserved to stay the same. Other things changed, and the changes were good. The shop had a second mechanic now. His name was Diego, 26 years old, who'd grown up in Red Valley and learned to work on engines by taking apart and reassembling everything mechanical within reach of his grandmother's house. He'd come to Jack in the spring and asked for work, and Jack had given him a carburetor and a torque spec in 40 minutes. Diego had it done in 32 properly without being told twice about anything. Jack had hired him on the spot. The learning curve had required patience on both sides. Diego was fast, but sometimes careless. Jack was thorough, but sometimes too quiet about what he expected. They worked it out across 4 months of Tuesday mornings and Saturday afternoons, one job at a time, until they had the rhythm of people who'd decided to trust each other's competence and were being proven right. Del Prescott had started coming in on Thursday mornings. Not for his bike, he'd started helping Diego with whatever needed a second pair of experienced hands, which it usually did. He didn't ask for anything. He just showed up and worked the way he'd showed up and worked his whole life because purpose was not something Del Prescott was capable of living without for very long. Gloria Park's laundromat was still there. The easement situation had actually protected her better than anyone realized. Hayes's revised development plan had gone around her corner lot rather than through it, and in the new layout, the laundromat occupied an anchor position on what was being developed as a pedestrian corridor. The foot traffic was better than ever. She'd stopped bringing food to the shop out of pity and started bringing it out of friendship, which was a different thing entirely, and they both knew it. Maria Diaz had taken her pottery shop back. She'd taken Hayes's offer without hesitation, signed the buyback papers the same day they were presented, and reopened 3 weeks later with a handmade banner over the door that said simply, "Still here." Hector had driven up from Albuquerque for the reopening. He'd stayed 5 days. On his last night, he and Jack and Arthur Reyes and Dell had sat in the shop after closing with a bottle of decent whiskey and talked until midnight. And the conversation had been the kind that happens between people who have been through something together and are now on the other side of it, figuring out what the something meant. Arthur had asked near the end of the night, "Do you feel different?" Jack had thought about it honestly. "Not different," he said, "more like myself, which is different from different." Arthur had nodded at that. He understood it. It was the same feeling Jack suspected that Arthur had carried for decades, the feeling of being fully what you are without apology and without concealment after a period of being something quieter. Emily was there that night too. She had arrived after dinner with dessert from the diner across the street, and she'd stayed fitting into the conversation, the way she fit into things with precision and warmth, and the particular ease of someone who knows she belongs somewhere and doesn't need to announce it. She and Jack had arrived at something. Not quickly, not with declarations or dramatic moments. The way things arrive, when two careful people take their time gradually with honesty, one conversation at a time, until one morning, Jack had looked at her across the workbench while she was going over quarterly numbers and thought simply and completely, there she is, and something in him had settled into a shape it hadn't had in a very long time. He hadn't said that to her, not in those words, but he'd said other things over several months that meant it, and she had heard them, and she had said her own things that meant the same. And by the time Arthur asked his question on that whiskey and midnight night, Emily was sitting on a stool next to Jack and her shoulder was against his arm, and nobody in the room remarked on it because it was simply the way things were now. On a Saturday morning in November, a young woman came into the shop. She was maybe 20, with engine grease already on her forearms at 10 in the morning, and the direct eyes of someone who knows what she wants. She had a 1982 Ironhead Sportster in the bed of her truck that she'd bought from a salvage yard, and she wanted to know if Jack would let her work on it in the shop after hours in exchange for cleaning the bays on weekends. Jack looked at her, looked at the Sportster in the truck bed. It was bad. Frame rust, seized motor, missing electrical, the kind of wreck that discourages everyone except the people who were built for exactly this kind of problem. "What do you know about Ironheads?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Yet." He looked at her for another moment. "Sunday mornings," he said, 7 to noon. "Diego will be here. He'll show you the basics. The cleaning stays regardless of what the bike does." She stuck out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was solid. "What's your name?" he said. "Raina," she said. "Jackie," he said. "Don't be late." She wasn't. On a Tuesday morning in late November, Jack came in before dawn and pulled the canvas off the Harley. He did this sometimes, not often, just when he needed to. He stood in front of it in the dark shop and turned on the single bench lamp that threw everything into warm relief, and he looked at it. The tank with its repaired section, the pinstripe running clean along the lower edge, his hand and hers meeting in the same line, inseparable, now in the way that repairs become inseparable from the original when they were done with enough care. He put his palm flat on the tank. "We're all right," he said, not to the bike, not to the shop. To whoever was listening, from wherever the people we loved go when they leave us, to the part of Sarah that he carried in his chest every day, like a compass needle, pointing him toward the true direction of things. He stood there for a while. Then he put the canvas back, careful and exact. He made coffee. He unlocked the bay door. He let the morning in. Outside on Clement Street, the town was waking up the way it woke up every day, slowly, with the unhurried certainty of a place that has been here long enough to stop worrying about whether it will still be here tomorrow. The light came in long and cold from the east. Someone's radio was on somewhere. A truck went past and the driver raised 2 fingers from the wheel at Jack, and Jack raised 2 fingers back. Simple. Complete. The entire grammar of belonging expressed in a gesture that cost nothing and meant everything. I went back to the bench and picked up his coffee and looked at the day that was opening in front of him. The jobs booked, the parts coming in, Diego arriving at 7, Raina on Sunday, Emily at lunch, Dell on Thursday, Arthur calling at some point from wherever Arthur was this week, the steady accumulation of a life that was full in the particular way that lives become full when you stop running from what you are and start living inside it. The man they'd called a quiet old mechanic. The man Victor Hayes' dead brother had described 25 years ago to a kid who hadn't yet understood what he was hearing. The man Dennis Pruitt had spent a quarter century trying to diminish and had failed completely, failed in every direction, because you cannot diminish a man who has built something real out of the materials of actual life. Jack Whitmore set down his coffee cup. He picked up his first tool of the day. And in Red Valley, Colorado, on a Tuesday morning in November, in a small shop at the end of Clement Street, where the sign was hand-painted and the floor had 20 years of good work pressed into it, the man they had always underestimated opened for business. Exactly who he was, exactly where he chose to be, not despite everything that had happened, but because of it. Some men walk away from their name. Jack Whitmore had simply been keeping his safe until it was needed again. And now that it was back where it belonged, in the light, in the work, in the life he had built from everything he refused to surrender, nobody in Red Valley would ever call him just a mechanic again. He was the man who never left his brothers behind,